Hello, everyone. Thank you. Welcome. I'm so glad to see so many of you attending. My name is Wallace Milner. I'm the chair of Portland State University Young Democratic Socialists, and I'm also going to be the moderator tonight. I'm really excited for this event. We have panelists from each of the three major ideological caucuses, and we're going to be talking tonight about the question of a socialist party. We're hoping to address the issue of whether Portland Democratic Socialists of America should be involved in the formation of an independent political party, what said party would look like, how we should engage with existing political parties. It's going to be a great time. I think it'll be a wonderful opportunity for us to advance our understanding of theory and engage with our comrades in a well-reasoned and respectful debate. With all that said, we hope tonight is informative. We hope that all discussion is comradely. I'm sure that we can expect that from our panelists. We hope that we can see that in the chat as well. There will be a place for you to have discussions in the Zoom webinar chat. We encourage that you be respectful, substantive. We want you to try and make contributions in the chat, but make sure that they're actually adding to the discussion. Don't flood it with comments like this or that, just celebrating something that one of the panelists has said, and try not to get too dug into the weeds of things. I know we're all socialists here, and if we could, we would love to debate all day this or that minute point from a far gone historical moment, but this isn't the opportunity to write a thesis paper. It's a chance for us to have a lively and engaging discussion with lots of different people and lots of different viewpoints. With that said, if you have any questions for our panelists, you can submit them in the Q&A box. We have a number of helpers in the group chat who are able to answer questions if you have any about Zoom functions, technology issues, or the structure of the panel. All that said, I'm going to wait just a moment so that anybody who wants to join is able to, and then I'll introduce our panelists and we'll begin. All right. I would like to start by introducing every panelist, and if you could just very briefly say hello and maybe give a description of who you are and what caucus you're in. It doesn't have to be very long, but I think it would just be great if everyone could know your name, your pronouns, and who you're affiliated with. So if we could start with Kirsten.
Hey everyone, my name's Kirsten. I use they, them pronouns. I am in the Libertarian Socialist Caucus. And yeah, very excited to be here and expound on things.
Olivia.
Hi everyone, my name is Olivia Cappy Smith. My pronouns are she, her. I am in the Red Caucus, which is a caucus of revolutionary Marxists in Portland DSA, and I'm also very excited to be here.
And Rick.
Yeah, hi, Rick Beliveau, he, him, and I'm in the Bread and Roses Caucus, which is a Marxist caucus in DSA nationally.
And as I already said, my name's Wallace, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm not affiliated with any of the caucuses. With that all said, I think that we're ready to begin our panelists' introductory statements. Kirsten, if you'd be willing to begin.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as I already said, I am representing the Libertarian Socialist Caucus on this panel. For folks who probably aren't familiar with what libertarian socialism is, the long and short of it is that it's an umbrella term for various socialist tendencies who tend to be somewhat skeptical of the ability to use the state as a means to institute socialism, which we define as collective and democratic ownership of wealth, as well as workers' self-management. We also tend to favor the development of socialism through a dual power strategy, which means building our own directly democratic socialist institutions who exist in opposition to capitalism and as potentially an alternative to the state. Now, where does that leave the LSC on the question of a party and even electoral politics more broadly? I must preface by saying that there is a diversity of opinion on this subject within the caucus, ranging from anti-party to pro-party. For the purposes of this discussion, we are going to be taking a neutral stance on the formation of a party in favor of emphasizing a municipalist strategy that can be implemented either as in a party or as an organization. And in fact, I will be drawing on historical and contemporary examples of parties and orgs who have either explicitly used this strategy or engaged in a complementary praxis with electoral results. Now, what does the municipal strategy entail? At the LSC, we are pretty heavily inspired by Cooperation Jackson, based in Jackson, Mississippi, and specifically the Jackson-Cush Plan. The Jackson-Cush Plan is a three-pronged strategy to develop communities that are based in radical democracy, both in governance and the economy. The prongs are as follows: the development of neighborhood assemblies, the establishment of a municipal party that coordinates platforms and candidates based out of the assemblies, and the development of a municipal federation of worker cooperatives and unions. We believe this to be a successful form of organization because it extends past traditional forms of political organizing, such as voting for X candidate and hoping good things will happen. It goes beyond that to making solidarity a lived experience prior to and independent of the electoral process. Cooperation Jackson is able to achieve electoral wins because the community already feels like they are a part of the political and economic process before they even got to the ballot box. And in fact, they have already tangibly benefited from this organization, regardless of this organization's candidate even winning elections at all. Another historical example that have used extensive forms of social organization based in mutual aid and providing tangible goods to the community to electoral wins on a municipal level would be the Black Panther Party. After building up extensive and durable non-state institutions such as community defense patrols, the Black Panther Ambulance Service, the free school breakfast program, sickle cell anemia testing centers, just to name a few, the Black Panther Party was able to turn this into municipal wins in various cities. Now, I've explained why I think that there is a necessary component of building independent community institutions, be they unions, cooperatives, mutual aid programs, etc., when organizing a community. But I haven't touched on why we're focusing on municipal elections specifically instead of state and federal elections. Now, I mentioned earlier that Libertarian Socialists are generally skeptical in regards to the state. One reason pertinent to this discussion is there is a complete domination of two parties in the upper level of government, and both parties are adamantly opposed to any notion of economic democracy, much less explicitly socialist demands. I worry about sustaining active participation and larger interest in the political sphere when we expend so much energy into electing people into positions where they will likely not be able to achieve much if they are running as either Democrats or third party. There is an argument for the bully pulpit, to be sure, which means electing stalwart socialists who know their position is futile, but use that platform to highlight the futility of working within a liberal capitalist democracy. But the bully pulpit is still a cold comfort to the brutality of the living conditions of the working class, particularly working class people of color. This isn't to say that by electing socialists into municipal positions, we will experience win after win. There will still be a struggle to be had. But I do believe that it is easier to sway the political sphere that you are closest to. And given the current political climate, there may be a renewed interest in municipal politics by the larger populace. I will point out that of our 3 electoral campaigns, Universal Preschool Now was far and away the most successful, despite numerous setbacks. I think the success of getting Up Now on the ballot speaks to the idea that municipal politics could be a successful arena for us, and that many folks in the communities want tangible policy to vote on, as opposed to voting for a politician who one hopes will do the things they campaign on. Further, the municipal arena is absolutely a site of socialist struggle. Many abolitionist demands can happen on the municipal level. Equitable urban planning is a municipal issue and is very relevant to many communities of color, particularly here in Portland. There are local climate issues that can be addressed municipally. There is a wealth of socialist demands to be made in the city, and by developing an involved and participatory municipal platform, we can galvanize people. In the book Fearless Cities, A Global Guide to the Municipalist Movement, there are a myriad of examples from cities all over the world of grassroots organizers developing participatory forms of political engagement. From Valparaiso, Chile, to Porto Alegre, Brazil, to Barcelona in Camus and beyond, socialists have been using participatory town halls.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could you turn on your video?
Oh, did my video?
I'm afraid it did, yes.
Oh my gosh. Was it off this entire time?
It was.
Oh, that is really unfortunate because that is where all my prepared remarks are. All right, one.
Well, we've been able to hear you, but unfortunately we haven't been able to see you.
Okay. So that is.
Sorry for interrupting you.
Not a problem. Can I just finish this one bit and I'll see if I can do something about being able to look at my remarks off my phone for the next one? Okay, my apologies. I did not realize that was going to happen. All right. Socialists have been using participatory town halls, the neighborhood assemblies, and budgeting processes to identify what issues are facing a community and using that information to develop platforms and manifestos largely focused on austerity and urban development. When these movements produce candidates, they win, and I believe they were able to do so because they developed a strong sense of solidarity and trust between these organizations and the communities. So in conclusion, I believe the DSA would do well to build working class power by establishing relationships with the communities we want to empower and represent through extensive non-state institutions that directly benefit those communities, as well as pursuing a municipalist electoral strategy that prioritizes community involvement on an individual level. And that's it for my opening remarks.
All right, Olivia, if you could go next.
Yeah, so this is a huge topic and I have a lot to say, so I'll try to talk fast, but yeah, big topic. So I joined DSA in 2016 because Bernie Sanders said he was a Democratic Socialist. So I, of course, joined the Democratic Socialists of America, along with thousands of other young people like me. So DSA, of course, as we know, endorsed Bernie Sanders again in 2020 for his second run, and campaigning for Bernie as DSA was a great entry point to have these conversations with so many people and push the conversation even further as socialists. And after Bernie dropped out, a lot of these conversations have been happening around DSA spaces. How do we organize ourselves for the fight ahead in the future? And I want to preface this by saying, I don't think we should limit ourselves to the electoral sphere, as we really have not been doing in DSA. I think that workplace organizing and even now like unemployment councils are where we can have a lot of power. But in terms of this conversation of where we go as an organization post Bernie, I believe that it is time for a party of our own right now. Am I saying that we need to run Bernie Sanders on a third party ticket? Absolutely not. I don't even want to use the term third party right now. I think if you start out the gate with this concept of running a presidential campaign to start a new party, I don't think that's strategic in this moment. But I do think the presidential race offers us a glimpse of how the democratic machine will always operate. It's not enough that we have this global climate disaster looming, but now we are in a pandemic. We have a mass uprising across the country. You know, we're facing multiple extremely urgent crises. And still, knowing all of this, the Democrats are running with Biden, a rapist, a warmonger who can barely string a sentence together, because they would rather lose to Trump than and be able to uphold the status quo than win. And I know there are a few who say we should be taking over the Democratic Party. That will never happen. They will not allow that to happen. I'm not even gonna get into that. But in terms of the presidential race, I think Bernie was our best shot at a socialist identifying candidate ever winning on the Democratic ballot line. And we know now that they won't let us do it. But when we start talking about our own party, like I said, we don't need to be pie in the sky and think we can just snap our fingers and have a national convention in a year with a couple thousand people and announce a new national party. We need to start at the local level. We can start by building state parties from the ground up before we can even talk about an actual national party. I think with COVID, there's going to be even more support and more necessity for an initiative like this, not only because, you know, one of the most vile people in the Democratic Party is now their leader, but because they've also shown us that everything they have told us is impossible for so long was a lie, and people are realizing this. You know, these bailouts to the rich during COVID, while working people are lucky to get a one-time check, the healthcare crisis. Now we have Democrat mayors and governors around the country brutally cracking down on protesters, even though they're trying to distance themselves from that now. I think now is the time to leave this failing party and stake our claim to organized party politics in the US. So I want to talk quickly about like how we're running candidates. The Democratic Party is where social movements go to die. We all know this, and yet when we're running DSA candidates on the Democratic Party line, we're funneling people into this failing idea of a party by having them register as Democrats. When they're unaffiliated, we're actually moving them backwards. You know, when we're canvassing for these candidates who are running as Democrats and we come across someone who's not registered, that person is actually more politically developed for our purposes than someone who's a registered Democrat in many cases, because likely they're not registered in either party because they don't see a difference between the two major parties, and they're right. And we should be fostering that inclination. I think they're already ripe for socialism right there. But by registering them as a Democrat, we're moving them backwards. We're working to rehabilitate this party that fucking hates us, that we hate. And I think, you know, it's not a good strategy. 1/3 of people in Oregon, 1/3 of voters in Oregon are unaffiliated. And those are the people that we should be trying to reach. But when we go out canvassing, we focus on knocking on the doors of registered Democrats because that's who's going to be voting when we're running in the Democratic primary. And if there are volunteers during these campaigns who are tasked with reaching out to unaffiliated or unregistered voters, it's to get them to register as Democrats, as I said, to this party that's not ours. If we were running socialists in general elections, we could almost exclusively reach out to unaffiliated voters. But we can't be banking on the support of people who are already dissatisfied with the two-party system and then also be funneling them directly into that system. That's a good thing that they're disaffected, and we should be harnessing that for our purposes. And instead, we're spinning our wheels trying to drive people into the place that's going to kill the kind of social movement that we're trying to create. So I'm not sure how much time I have left, but the other thing I want to get to on this is what I mean by a party. And 4 minutes, thank you. I'm going to get more into this, I think, in response to one of the questions we're going to talk about later on. But when I say a party, I mean a place where we can organize our movement and all the different parts of it, which all reinforce one another, which we already do. But one of the things holding us back is that right now, what we are is essentially an activist organization. The average person thinks that we're a nonprofit with staff and that you would be hired to work for us. They don't think that your average person engages in politics like this. They don't have that conception. Like I get asked all the time, oh, you work for DSA full time? Like they think it's a job. They know there are political parties though, and that there are members of them. But right now their conception of that is just voting. But if we can get them in the door through the platform of candidates with the party name next to the candidates, but have these candidates also be drawing attention to the other party activities that include labor organizing, building community in the party, a real full-time organization. You know, part of the DSA reasoning of running candidates, as Keir said, is the bully pulpit to build socialism. But that is impossible to do in the Democratic Party, which we know is constantly working to sabotage our movement. And that will make these new people not want to engage in politics. And the Democratic Party co-ops our candidates. You know, we see a pattern of candidates, DSA candidates who run on the Democratic Party ballot line who shift rightward. If we're running candidates as our own party, we can register potential voters as our members. We're getting them on board, not just with the candidate, but with our organization. I think if you want to get people involved in your organization through elections, then you need to run as your organization. Otherwise, we're no different than all these other issue-based organizations who also back candidates. And like I said, COVID, uprisings, climate crisis, rising fascism have all created a new urgency for this. We are living in unprecedented times. I don't think we can wait and align with the Dems sometimes, maybe do a break someday. I don't think we can wait for there to be 20, 40, 60 members of the squad. I think the time to start building the structures at a local level for a mass party organization is right now. You know, I think that you need to look at your state specific context, of course, but here in Oregon, we can get on the ballot for a state representative race as a socialist party with about 500 signatures. And you always hear about the legal structure existing to entrench currently existing parties. But if we can become an existing party, then we get entrenched too. We have to collect 30,000 signatures to become a party in the state of Oregon. Look at what we just did with Up Now in 5 weeks during a pandemic. If we have 2 years to collect those signatures statewide, we can absolutely do it. And then I think I'm almost out of time, but once you do that, all you need to do to remain a recognized party with statewide ballot access is have your registered members stay above 14,000 people. And third parties like the Green Party are always talking about fighting for ballot access because they're not a real membership organization that does work besides that ballot access fight. That's their whole thing. And DSA is in a unique position because we already have this sort of infrastructure in place. So I'm out of time, but I think the time is now, and hopefully I'll get to expand on some of this later.
All right. Thank you, Olivia. Rick, if you could go.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Wallace, and everyone else who put this together, and thanks, Olivia and Kirsten. That was great. Just going to go right into it. So in opening, I'll just let you know that I'll be advocating for what's called the dirty break strategy. I'll be explaining more about that later, but first I just want to point out that I would guess everyone on this panel, everyone in the audience would agree that the Democratic Party is a capitalist party to the core. And because of the particular structure of the American two-party winner-take-all electoral system, labor, racial justice, and other groups are stuck inside of the Democratic Party, as unproductive as that is. A really good article that lays out some of this is, it was in New Left Review in 1980, The Barren Marriage of American Labor and the Democratic Party, written by Mike Davis. And it details how labor has gotten really nothing in return for their loyalty to the Democratic Party. And more importantly, the chance for a Labor Party was missed, and labor remained in the Democrats, sort of in that period when the CIO was like at its top of its game in the 1930s. It's an uneasy coalition. So for example, the Democratic Party includes opposing interests, such as people who advocate for Medicare for all, and also includes the healthcare insurance companies, which is a totally untenable situation. And you could spend all day citing examples of the political bankruptcy of the Democratic Party, but it's worth pointing out, and this relates to what Olivia was saying, that currently in Oregon has a Democratic governorship, a Democratic supermajority in the state house, and in a very liberal Portlandia. And this amounts to nothing in regards to the continuation of neoliberal austerity or when Trump orders federal troops to invade Portland. So one question worth asking is, why do we need a party at all? For socialists and Marxists, the answer is simple. For class formation and building class consciousness and organization. To paraphrase Karl Marx, on the question of class consciousness, the working class must go from being a class in itself to a class for itself. For Marx, class struggle was the only path forward to socialism, but the degree of class consciousness does not organically arise on its own. A mass working class party is necessary to move beyond narrow sectional labor struggles and other struggles. And contrary to the determinist view that sees the class structure automatically leading to the formation of parties, Chris Maisano wrote that to a significant extent, it was parties that organized classes and not the other way around. So before going into the dirty break, it's worth going into the two traditional strategies on the left regarding electoral politics and party formation. The first one is the realignment strategy. This was the position of DSA through the 1980s and 90s and up to about 2016. The strategy centers around working within the Democratic Party with progressives with the intent of transforming the Democratic Party into a type of social democratic party. DSAers such as Ron Dellums and John Conyers, well, they weren't bad, but they were indistinguishable from progressive liberals and failed at transforming the Democratic Party. The second strategy is the clean break strategy. This strategy was, and still is for many, the gospel on the left for decades, whether it's the Green Party Workers' World Party, the old ISO that disintegrated, many other left groups are for a clean break, and they won't use a Democratic Party ballot line on principle. But after decades of pursuing the strategy, these groups are extremely marginal, and when they do run in elections, rarely exceed 7% and much more often less than 1% of the vote. So during the November 2016 membership explosion in DSA, and undoubtedly inspired by the 2016 Bernie campaign, Seth Ackerman wrote an influential article, Blueprint for a New Party, in Jacobin magazine. And that article detailed a strategy of socialists using the Democratic Party line not to realign or reform the Democratic Party, but for building a socialist electoral organization independent of the Democrats. To some degree, the campaigns of AOC, Rashida Tlaib, and others are examples of this strategy to some degree. And while the Ackerman strategy has lots of merits, Seth was more or less agnostic on the question of whether this would lead to a takeover of the Democratic Party or whether we would break away and form an independent party. He wasn't clear on that. And in Bread and Rose's caucus, we're not agnostic on the question of an independent party for the working class. We believe political independence for the working class is essential. And to continue developing, building on the Ackerman strategy in regards to party formation, Eric Blank wrote the article, The Ballot and the Break, in Jacobin magazine in December 2017. And the article examines the most electorally successful workers' party in the history of the United States, the Minnesota Farmer Labor Party. The article tells of the earlier success of the populist Nonpartisan League, which ran on the Democratic and Republican ballot lines. This success led the Minnesota Socialist Party to change its strategy and to morph into what was called the Working People's Nonpartisan League, bringing along a majority of the state's labor unions into this formation. And the Working People's Nonpartisan League fought not only for labor, but for racial justice issues, such as when they led opposition to a planned theatrical production of Birth of a Nation. Eventually, after the Working Party's Nonpartisan League gained an electoral strength, of course, the Minnesota legislature, dominated by the Republicans, but also Democrats, passed legislation that hobbled their ability of these parties to run in the primaries for the Democratic and Republican Party ballot lines. So while the Nonpartisan League merged with the Democrats at this point, the Working People's Nonpartisan League, chose political independence, which was always their stated goal, and founded the Farmer Labor Party. Importantly, the Working People's Nonpartisan League waited until they had built up electoral power and organizational strength and won the allegiance of most labor unions until they started the Farmer Labor Party. It is this necessity for a mass working class party that is at the heart of the Dirty Break strategy. The Bernie campaigns of 2016 and 2020 gave us a glimpse of what we could do with our own political party. The Sanders campaigns inspired people to get involved in politics and run as democratic socialists. The campaigns popularized socialism and helped build rank and file networks and labor unions, and transformational reforms like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal pull extremely well today because of these campaigns, something that was impossible to imagine as recently as 2013. And kind of to wrap up, Bernie always said, not me, us. So if we want a socialist society, we need to build the organizational structures to get us there. And that's up to us. We have a world to win.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to our audience for their conversations. I just remind everyone, if you have questions, use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom call. And in a little bit, I'll go through some of the questions and ask some of them. But first, I have some questions, or rather our team of moderators has developed some questions for our panelists. And so I'd like to begin, and after this, we'll go in the same order we went for our opening statements. Begin with the question, who is in the party? In the past, many socialist parties were essentially collections of labor unions that proclaimed the goal of socialism. We can also see distinctions between a, quote, socialist party, which propagandizes the goal of socialism, and a, quote, workers' party or labor party, which are parties that may include socialists, but are designed around workers. Many socialist organizations have also carried international affiliations. So my question for each of the panelists is, who would be in your party coalition? How would you get their participation? And if you are against forming a party in the short or the long term, I asked the same questions. Who would be in your alternative organizations? How would you establish international organization without a party? So to summarize, who is your party for, and how is it going to gain their participation? We'll start with Kirsten. Kirsten, you're muted.
All right, there we go. So to restate the Libertarian Socialist Caucus position, we are neutral on becoming a party, but are in favor of a dual power strategy that uses both non-state directly democratic institutions and municipalist electoralism when it's advantageous and smart to do so. So when I think to that strategy and what that means for party org coalitions, I think we must ally ourselves with organizations who share certain points of unity with us, and most importantly, are organizing around an issue that we are not taking a definitive lead on. I say this because I believe it's paramount to understand that we exist in an ecosystem of movements. It's important to hone in on our speciality while also being engaged in mutual support with other organizations who have compatible socialist values, but maybe a different speciality. When I look to my influences here, many of the examples are truly a coalition of many groups. Cooperation Jackson itself is a few different organizations, in addition to also being comprised of worker cooperatives and labor solidarity groups. So to me, where the DSA fits in here can be our focus on labor, both unions and cooperatives, mutual aid, and work around municipal elections and county measures. But it's important to note that there is so much other organizing that needs to be done, and there are many non-state institutions that need to be made. We should seek out and establish ongoing relationships with organizations who do work around, like as examples, tenant organizing, community land trust, autonomous disaster aid, community defense, food sovereignty, among many others. We need to identify who is building collective participatory institutions like this, and then federate with them and coordinate together to build a cohesive vision for the left within our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Olivia, and to restate the question, who would be in your party and how would you achieve their participation?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to start with the saying that many of us are fond of repeating, which is Bernie would have won. If you believe that Bernie would have won, then you're already on board with the key premise of the feasibility of a new party. We believe that Bernie would have won because in a general election that consists of more unaffiliated voters than either registered Democrats or Republicans, Bernie does better with this voting bloc than anyone else. He also presents a draw to Republican voters. I saw a question in the chat about this as well, but I think it's exemplified by the nearly half of Republicans who support Medicare for all. So it's clear that Democrat primaries are actually less friendly terrain for left-wing ideas than a general election. So now this does not mean that Bernie would have been more likely to win a presidential election if he ran under a new party or as an independent. We don't have the kind of numbers to mount that kind of campaign nationwide right now, I don't think. However, this premise that general elections are more friendly to left-wing ideas applies to smaller elections. And I think in general, like right there is where our base is for party recruitment. We can engage this large swath of voters in House races, city council races, so on, and get them involved directly in the party. I think there's this argument that we need to have a crowd before we have a party. I think we have it. There's never going to be a bigger national crowd behind a socialist major political figure than we have right now. So our party base, of course, consists of that large swath of voters, also unorganized workers, rank and file membership of unions. There are some members of failed third party efforts like Working Families Party, Green Party that we can reach out to, but their leadership's obviously not going to get on board. But this is the same general idea of DSA. It's open to anyone who wants to join. It's big tent socialism. I don't think we can wait for the leadership of major unions to get on board, and that shouldn't be our target. The reality of now is that all of the big labor unions are run by people who are literally Joe Biden supporters. We're not gonna wait for their leadership to change. I think we're gonna go directly to their members and recruit out of their rank and file. That's obviously a major base. But also, unfortunately, union membership is only about 10% of workers. So we obviously need that to be higher. And I think that'll be part of the work of what we do as a party, because the Democrats are not doing this. Additionally, I don't think that our party would be branded as like a labor party or a workers party. It's a socialist party with a mass membership of workers. The idea should be you've got Republicans, you've got Democrats, and you've got socialists. They're very different. It's that simple. I think if you say Democratic Socialist, it gets confusing. We brand ourselves as a fringe Democrat group when we're not. I don't think people who are not involved in the labor movement will understand the use of the word labor, like a labor party or workers party. And I think that, yeah, the difference is that we're a group of socialists, and the party will continue DSA's socialist work on a variety of non-electoral projects while being entirely member-led. The work we do, the way we're run, and the candidates we run are explicitly socialist. And I'm out of time. I have additional things to say about international coalitions, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Olivia. Rick, who would you want to be in your party after the dirty break? And what sort of coalition do you intend to build, and how do you intend to build it before that as well?
Yeah, thanks. And kind of along the lines of, what I was talking about with the Working People's Nonpartisan League and how they morphed into eventually being the Farmer Labor Party, to get involved in sort of like political work, electoral work, and as Olivia and Kirsten say, all kinds of projects in the community, whether it's anti-racist work or it's labor work. Never should any of that kind of labor or social movement work be at the expense of the electoral work. They should be working together and benefiting each other. So I believe that I lean toward a mass-based workers sort of party, whether it's called socialist or whatever is a little bit immaterial and kind of getting into being prefigurative a little bit. But I think in addition to working class individuals, it's very important to pull in the working class institutions like left labor unions, such as, right now DSA has a partnership through the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee with the United Electrical Workers, and we built good relations with the American Postal Workers Union, the Communication Workers of America, International Longshore and Warehouse Union, National Nurses United, Militant Teachers Unions, etc. I think all these are the types of organizations that we would want to be allied with this working class party, with the workers party. And I stress this sort of like this class dimension to it because there are parties like Podemos in Spain that are kind of like squishy on, like they're more like a populist kind of party that just talks about kind of democracy and sort of things like that. I think we need to be very explicit about being antagonists and who, naming who we're up against, who our enemy is, and why we're fighting against capital. So I do think that in order to attract a significant layer of people from, the multiracial working class and labor unions, the pre-party formation should continue to get dirty, do the dirty work in the Democratic Party, but not to realign or fix the Democratic Party, but to heighten the contradictions within it. And it's simply a fact today, I think also it must be said that a lot of, BIPOC organizers are activists within the Democratic Party, and some of them even see the Democratic Party as their party. So there's a lot more work to be done within there. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Rick. For our second question, there have been at least a dozen, maybe more, socialist parties founded in the United States since the end of World War II. None of them have become relevant beyond their small sectarian roots. There are also now several third parties nationally, and even more in Oregon, and they're largely locked out of electoral power. What is your strategy to avoid these outcomes? And why do you or your organization more broadly have a better shot at being successful? If you're against forming a party in the short or long term, how can socialists avoid the negative outcomes of other endeavors, such as the Democratic Party realignment, liberal NGOs, and unstructured formations like Occupy Wall Street? It looks like we're experiencing some slight technical difficulties with Kirsten. So Olivia, if you could respond to that first.
Yeah. So I just want to reiterate, I think we all know because we're living through it, but we are in unprecedented times right now. You know, as we're very fond of reminding people, DSA is the largest socialist organization in the United States. It's the largest socialist organization in the United States since the end of World War II. We're not the same as these third-party efforts that are being referenced, and this is a historic moment for socialism that we should be seizing. Prior to World War II, there were powerful socialist and communist parties that were very influential, but because of various factors and repression, they couldn't maintain it. I think now we're in an era, a new era, where socialism is no longer a dirty word, you know, associated with a foreign enemy. As much as the Democrats try with the Russia stuff, you know, we had a major presidential candidate who helped normalize socialism to where it's a majority of young people identify the term favorably. I mean, I work with kids and they're all, I can see them getting radicalized. It's amazing. In terms of the other third parties, like I've been saying, you can't just launch a national party. You can't just run a presidential candidate every few years. You need to start locally at the state level and win small elections before you even start thinking about running a president. So I think that we would have to have this model be replicated and succeed in like 20 different states before we even talk about coalescing as a national party. But if we say that we want a party at some point, we have to start doing that now. We're running out of time. Most of the minor parties in Oregon have double, triple, or 10 times DSA's membership in the state. The Independent Party of Oregon literally has 10 times our membership because it's very easy to just register for a party. That's engaging in politics in a way that people are familiar with, but they aren't successful because that's all those parties are. Your party has to actually be doing work outside of electoral politics to sustain itself and its members, which these other parties don't do. In terms of avoiding some of these outcomes, like I said, I think starting locally before you think about national is a start. Also the necessity of doing this extra electoral work. If we're starting a new party separate from DSA that only runs people in elections, while separately DSA does all the work we're doing now, that's worthless. That's not gonna work. I think we need to use an electoral platform to gain membership in the party to do the work to destroy capitalism. As socialists, we identify electoral politics as only one form of power. Labor organizing and direct action are just as important. And if you're only doing one, you're setting yourself up for failure. All that work needs to be reinforcing each other. And right now we're doing this, except our electoral work is still on the Democratic Party ballot line. We're still making it seem as though the Democratic Party is friendly to socialism. And you know, our electoral strategy has helped to make socialism more mainstream, but we haven't really gained much power in terms of actually building socialism from it. You know, Bernie Sanders ran 2 campaigns for president and got millions of voters. And after he loses, where do they go? They might join one of the dozens of organizations who supported him, but they probably won't join an activist organization because it's an activist organization. He wasn't building a party. I'm at time.
Thank you, Olivia. Kirsten, to catch you up, I don't know how much of the question you heard, but we're talking about how a hypothetical party could evolve beyond the minuscule fractional parties that have formed that can't break beyond 1 or 2% of the vote, and also how a non-party formation could avoid being just another NGO or unstructured organization like Occupy Wall Street. If you'd like to respond to that.
Yeah, sure. So yes, we specifically outlined this municipalist electoral strategy because we believe it gives us the opportunity to run completely independently of the Democrat Party, which is something we believe to be vital to building real working class power. And it also allows us to run completely independently on elections that can be winnable. One of the reasons we did not take an explicitly pro-party stance is that we are very skeptical of a third party's ability to firstly break through and win the election, and then, should they do that, meaningfully impact the state and federal landscape. I do believe it's worth pointing out in this discussion that the last time a third party candidate won state level in Oregon was 1913. However, a reason we did not take an anti-party stance in this regard is because many of our influences in shaping our strategy did in fact use party-based electoral politics. Cooperation Jackson, for instance, has a strong relationship with the Malcolm X grassroots movement, a municipal political party focused on electing Black progressives and socialists to city council. Now, that makes sense for their strategy because municipal elections are partisan in Mississippi. However, they are not partisan here. So, like, say we ran someone for city council and, you know, they're in the voter ballot guide, but there's not going to be a party name listed next to them because they are fundamentally nonpartisan positions. So we would always have to be going a bit out of our way to let people know about our candidates being party affiliated if we were to run those municipal candidates. Now, I do want to go back to the necessity of separating ourselves from the Democrat Party imminently. So long as we work with them and run under their name, they'll always demand loyalty of us, even when their candidates and policies are explicitly against our socialist values. This will always be a rhetorical ploy used to undermine us, even as they kneecap us. And we would do well to put an end to it as soon as possible. And I think one way we can do that is by refocusing our priorities to these nonpartisan elections and building up that strong municipal resilient base. Now, there is something I want to touch on in regards to the structure of like creating participatory municipalist platforms, because there is a worry that might delve into an Occupy situation. And what I would stress is that we need to have political education around horizontal social structures like spokes council models and implement them when we are attempting to have collective conversations, like if we wanted to have a participatory town hall like east of 82nd and to determine the priorities and needs of the folks living there. What's important to note about these like spokes council models is that they are collaborative, but they are not lacking in structure. And I am at time. So I guess I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. I'd like to remind everyone, and I apologize for not saying this earlier as well. You can ask questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of Zoom. You're more than welcome to ask questions of individual candidates as well. It doesn't just have to be a generalized panelist. So if you have a question specifically related to something someone said, just specify who you'd like to talk to, and I'll direct a question to them. With that said, Rick, how do you plan, or how does your strategy plan to avoid getting hung up on the small, irrelevant third-party faction, and how do you avoid repeating the failures of previous Democratic Party realignment strategies?
Yeah, thanks, Wallace. Those are all really good questions. And the first one about how do you not repeat the mistakes of being a small marginal kind of sect is really important to me, because I spent some of my college years in the 90s involved in ISO. And, I think at the time nationally, they had like maybe 800 members. And I remember think if you could get into the 4-digit numbers nationally, that would be huge. It was just a whole different. It's hard to even describe the level of expectations that we had. You would have maybe 12 people in a room for a meeting, and if there were like 2 or 3 new people, you would get like so excited. And I've discussed this with other people in DSA before too, about kind of my political kind of thoughts on things. And basically the reason I got involved with DSA and got into socialist politics again is because I just never wanted to go back to that sort of marginal politics again. I wanted politics and socialism to be relevant. And I never wanted to be at a place where like I can't discuss socialism with my mom, which I can now, so we talk about Bernie and socialism. We were during the campaign a lot more, but anyway, I'll repeat myself a bit here, but I do think it's very important to continue doing the sort of dirty break strategy to continue to kind of gather more forces around us, including left labor unions, which I think we've already started making some progress and building some relationships there. And I think that at a very starting point, you should bring this sort of this idea, these sorts of forming a party to the DSA National Convention. I definitely think it's a bad idea to start a state by state sort of, I think the capitalists are organized sort of like nationwide, and we need to start organizing on that basis as well. So that's my take on that. And as far as how we can afford going down the road to sort of the realignment, the pitfalls of the realignment strategy, Bread and Roses was involved in bringing a resolution to the last convention, class struggle elections. And there were like, I'll just read out the 4 main kind of planks of this resolution. And the first one is very important: to openly identify as socialists. And then 2, through their election campaigns and once in office, see mobilizing and fighting alongside working people as one of their primary responsibilities. 3rd, actively and explicitly oppose racial, national, gender, and other forms of oppression and discrimination, and repudiate support from oppressive or bigoted forces. Oh, 1 minute. And 4th, commit to using their campaigns and elected offices to help build, unite socialist, union, and other worker organization and militancy, independent of candidates' campaigns and of the Democratic Party. That's it.
All right, thank you so much, Rick. I would like to remind everyone, there have been a number of wonderful questions. There is a spot at the bottom of the Zoom call for it's labeled Q&A. You can put your questions into there, and then in a moment, when we move on to audience questions, we'll be able to address them there. You can address your questions either to all of the panelists or to individuals, or you can just ask me how my day is going if you'd like to. With that said, our third and final moderator question is, what should the party fight for, and what should its principal activities be? For example, would it participate in elections? Would it seek to achieve state power through other means? Would it engage in education? Would it organize in civil society? How would this party organization differ from what DSA or other leftist organizations are already doing? If you're against forming a party in the short or long term, why are DSA and other organizations like neighborhood associations and labor unions sufficient currently to challenge capitalism? I'll address that question to Kirsten first.
All right. So I feel like I've spoken a lot about electoralism on this panel, and now I'm going to stop because I think this question is much bigger. And electoralism is but one small tool that we have here. When I ask myself, what should the DSA be doing? I immediately think local DSA chapters need to be focused on building resilient communities. And I did see Conrad's question in there, and I do want to clarify when I talk about resilient communities and stuff like that, I am talking about specifically reaching out to like tenants, wage workers, stuff like that, people that are specifically disenfranchised by the capitalist system and have no power within it. So continuing on, building resilient communities instilled with collective and democratic values. I may get a little bleak here, but I do think it's going to get a lot worse before we can hope that it will even get better. The uprisings all across the nation against our racist police force and, of course, the criminal justice system more broadly are truly inspiring. And while there have been some victories, the bipartisan consensus still seems to think that defunding cops is just too radical. To me, this points to a disconnect between those who governed and are governed. This leads to our electoral process moving at a somewhat almost glacial pace, unable to keep up with issues the working class will face, such as unemployment, housing security, climate change, and minimum wage. Like, dang, we have been having the fight for 15 conversation for 10 years now, and we don't have a $15 an hour minimum wage, and now that's not even livable. Do we have 10 years to argue about climate change? Congress moves too slow for the problems we face. And so I believe the DSA needs to invest its time, labor, and resources into creating durable non-state institutions like the ones I mentioned earlier. These institutions must be bound and embedded within the community. As a priority, I would say that we need, as a priority for the DSA specifically, I should say, I would say that we need to build up the labor movement here in Portland, as well as create worker cooperatives and have those movements work together. As the recession hits, organized workers, movement-based cooperatives, and extensive mutual aid systems are going to be our best bet for weathering through economic crises. Because these are all institutions and projects that we can directly control. They are both offensive and defensive. We need to prioritize projects that explicitly promote economic democracy in all its forms. Now, I mentioned earlier the ecosystem of movements and the need that we need to work in coalition with other groups who are also focused on building resilient communities and support their organizing goals. I say this again because truly the left needs an infrastructure that it can embed into its community and that the community will immediately benefit from and can trust to benefit from in the future. As the state and capitalism continue to degrade, these institutions can become a reliable source of social organization that generates and empowers revolutionary sentiment and autonomy. In closing, I'd like to quote the anarcho-syndicalist Buenaventura Durruti. "We will know how to accommodate ourselves for a time, for you must not forget we can also build. It is the workers who built these palaces and cities here in Spain and in America and everywhere. We, the workers, can build others to take their place, and better ones. We are not in the least afraid of ruins. We are going to inherit the earth, there's not a doubt about that, but we carry a new world in our hearts, and that world is growing by the minute."
Thank you so much. Next, I'll give the question to Olivia. Olivia, what would this hypothetical party do? What would its principal priorities be?
Yeah, so I'm also going to read a quote from a congressional report describing the Communist Party of the 1930s. So it says, "A full-time organization. American political parties are usually active during election campaigns. Their primary function is to elect this or that candidate to office. Between campaigns, activity is at a low ebb. The Communist Party functions at all times of the year, every day of the week, and at all hours of the day. It is a full-time organization which is not restricted to election campaigns. It persistently seeks to permeate every phase of American life for its own subversive purpose. Communist agents may be found wherever and whenever there is an opportunity for communist propaganda or the promotion of civil strife, whether it be the factory, the union, the church, the school, or the neighborhood." So again, this is what I talk about. This is what I mean when I talk about forming a party. I don't just mean a ballot line. While that is a part of it, I mean using the ballot line to funnel people into this full-time organization. Like I said, a place where we can organize our movement and all of the different parts of it will reinforce one another. DSA is uniquely set up for this already because this is essentially how we function non-electorally. And that is what differs us from these traditional concepts of third-party efforts. I think, in general, what we're fighting for is socialism. A lot of us have different ideas of how to get to this place. And in that sense, it won't be different from DSA. What the party will fight for will be determined by the members, unlike the Democrats and Republicans, whose goals are chosen by the rich. With the members of the party, we should use every avenue available, which is elections, direct action, labor organizing, similar to what DSA is doing now. But if we are our own party, all our electoral organizing will directly reinforce all of our other work rather than the hope that it might reinforce our other work. We've hoped that by endorsing Bernie and other Democrats, people will join DSA. But if we're running our party, it will show our power and how many people are actually behind our platform. That's why the party has to be doing non-electoral work and all this other work inside the party to reinforce all of that together.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Rick, the same question to you. What would the role of the party be? And in the interim, why do you think that cooperation or organization within the Democratic Party until the dirty break can occur is sufficient to meet the challenges of the moment?
Okay, I don't have a quote, but I will sign off on Olivia's quote. I thought that was really good. And I definitely don't think that our party should be purely an electoral party. That's definitely never been my conception of what a socialist party or workers' party should do. So I'm going to do my best. This is where I left my prepared remarks. So I'm just going to be ad-libbing now. So have fun with that. But one thing I wanted to mention, as far as what we should kind of run on, I think we should have a pretty clear and concise platform. The Bolsheviks ran on bread, peace, land. I don't say it needs to be that simple, but a few kind of very simple sort of programs, and issues that we can run on. Also, I think that these sorts of even this platform that you run on only has so much traction unless your organization is asserting like real power. And I was really struck by something, and I sort of understood it, but the way Boots Riley articulated this at the Juneteenth kind of West Coast sort of dock workers shutdown in the Bay Area. And he was talking about how we can have millions of people on the streets protesting, and our government and our capital knows how to deal with this. They know how to curtail this. They know how to sort of people tire out or whatever. I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing it. We absolutely should. But Boots Riley made a very important point. What is power? And wealth is power, and we create the wealth, and we have the ability to withhold that power, to withhold labor power. And it isn't until we actually we credibly can shut shit down like that on a mass scale that program, at that point, that program will start to resonate with people, because I don't think people, you can have great ideas and it doesn't have the same resonance unless you have power to back it up. So does that answer the question pretty well? Oh, I didn't answer the part about the dirty break and waiting until political independence. Yeah, again, I think that if you do break away and form a third party too soon, you run the risk of not having that wielding that power. So we just we keep acting and building like a political party. I would even go so far as to say, we have a platform. Even if they run as Democrats, they run on that platform. I'm at time, sorry.
All right, thank you so much, Rick. We will be moving now towards our audience questions. If you would like to, feel free to ask more questions in the Q&A box. There are quite a lot of them. I'll try to get to as many as I can, but I don't know if we'll be able to. Our panelists have done an excellent job, though, so far of keeping time. I will ask of you, I'm going to be, with some of these questions, aiming just for individuals. If you would like to respond, message me and we'll see if there's time to do so. or maybe just, I don't know, wave your hand or something to give me a signal. And then, since there are so many questions, let's see if we can keep our responses to a minute or a minute and a half. I don't think we'll be able to time you. And lastly, Rick, if you could just make sure you're holding your microphone close to your mouth so that everyone could hear you. So our opening question will actually be for Rick. It's about the dirty break. An audience member is wondering, or actually this is an amalgamation of two, how does the dirty break differ from the strategy of realignment with the Democratic Party, and what would the timeline for it be? So Rick, if you could answer that.
Yeah, the first part of the question is pretty simple, I believe. How dirty break differs from realignment is that the expressed intent of the dirty break is to work on the Democratic Party ballot line. Sometimes as independents too. It's really not intended to only be on the Democratic Party. It's what is strategically or tactically best. So often it will be on the Democratic part, because in the primaries, I believe that we can do the work of heightening the contradictions within the Democratic Party by running on a platform and running on issues that the Democratic Party establishment absolutely hates. So I think that's how it's different. The expressed intent of the dirty break is not to reform or realign the Democratic Party into a social democratic party. It is to break off and start a different, our own party, explicitly a class party. Sorry, what was the second part of the question, Wallace?
The second question was what the timeline looks like for the dirty break.
That's the hard part. Yeah, that's really, that just kind of develops organically, and but I will at least recognize what Olivia said is that we're living in very dire times and very extraordinary times. So I think in my mind it's accelerated quite a bit, but still I think there are certain things that need to fall in place. Like Olivia said, 10% union density in the United States is pitiful. I think at some point we need to be talking about having 25% union density and a lot more labor militancy. So yeah, that's how I would answer that. It's hard to say.
Thank you, Rick. I'm sorry, everyone, if I'm not able to get to your question. They're moving rather quickly. I'm trying my best to follow them all. The next one I would like to give to Olivia, although again, if other members would like to answer, let me know. I'll start, Olivia, with the question of how much time and money would be required to keep DSA on the statewide ballot line, and what would prevent us from being stuck like the Greens, spending all our time struggling to keep the ballot status. And if you'd like to as well, you can connect that to the last question about the dirty break. Why would it be preferable to put in the effort to make sure that we're on the ballot line as opposed to trying to utilize the Democratic Party for right now?
Sure, yeah. I think I touched on this a little bit, but in Oregon, like I said, you can get on the ballot for a state representative race. Like say we wanted to just run in the general now against Rob Noce, we would need 500 signatures to be a Socialist Party candidate in that race in Oregon. And you need 30,000 signatures to become a party in the state of Oregon. And then like Jamie referenced, 14,000 people to maintain that ballot access. And I think that, like I said, these third-party organizations like the Green Party are always talking about fighting for that ballot access because they're not a real membership organization that does work that's extra electoral besides maintaining ballot access. Like no one wants to join a party or an organization rather if that's all it does. It's like, I'm not interested in being in that fight for ballot access if that's the only thing you're doing. And I think that's why they have to fight to maintain membership level to stay on the ballot. DSA is in a unique position to do that because we already have that infrastructure in place. I don't know in the question about how much money it would be. I don't know that. I think there's a lot of research that still has to be done on that question, but you know, I think that's something that we are getting good at with the Up Now campaign specifically, is that sort of outreach. I think it's definitely something DSA could take on if this was a priority for our organization. In terms of the dirty break versus realignment, my opinion is, in practice, I don't really think there's a difference. You know, there are plenty of organizations who run candidates, you know, on their issue in the Democratic Party, and we're no different from them if we're not a party. I've never heard of anyone in Congress who supports the idea of the dirty break, and they kind of seem like a key factor here in this strategy. I think that, you know, I just saw Jamal Bowman on MSNBC before this panel started talking about, you know, his win with Justice Democrats and how huge they were. And, you know, he was endorsed by DSA. No mention of DSA. You know, they were just one organization on a list of organizations that helped him get elected. And I think if we're not a party, we're an activist organization. And I think that we have to be a party to make that distinction, to build socialism.
This question is for Kirsten. You mentioned limiting activism or focusing primarily on municipal elections. The Portland City Council can be one of the most expensive elections, and indeed have a much larger vote share because there are no city districts. Why would we focus on municipal elections as opposed to state legislature races?
Yeah, so for me, the reason why we would focus on municipal legislature or municipal elections versus state legislature is that, at least currently with our municipal elections, if we get even one socialist onto like city council, they will represent 20% of the vote, as opposed to getting one socialist into state legislature and then affecting maybe far less than that amount. Further, I would say that it is easier to apply pressure to other candidates when we're all kind of in the same city. For instance, if it's a state legislature and it's a bill that's being passed that requires a vast majority of the representatives to vote on it, we might have issues pressuring state representatives that exist elsewhere in the state. Whereas the municipal elections, everyone's here. It's easy to galvanize people, I think, around local issues because those are immediately felt. And so, yeah, I guess that is what I would say. Thank you.
This question is for everyone, and I'd appreciate it if you could do it in kind of a lightning round fashion. See if you can answer it with just a sentence or maybe just a single answer. We'll start with Rick. Is there a political party from American history that you take particular inspiration from?
It would be a toss-up between the Socialist Party of America or the Communist Party USA. Went through so many different twists and turns and permutations. I would probably settle on the United Front period of the Communist Party USA. That's a tough one.
Olivia, same question.
Yeah, I would say the Communist Party of the 30s that was referenced in the quote, not the Communist Party USA currently.
And Kirsten.
Yeah, so for me, and I mentioned this in my opening pitch, that would be the Black Panther Party for me. I think that the institutions that they built and the extent to which that they were able to use them to benefit their communities is truly, truly awe-inspiring and is influential to this day.
My next question will be for all of the panelists as well. What would this hypothetical party or pre-party formations orientation or relationship towards establishment unions be? Specifically, how would we relate to collaborationist bosses would we partner with establishment unions? Would we attempt to take over unions? Or would we encourage workers to form independent labor organizations? We'll begin with Rick.
Yeah, like I said in my earlier comments, I think we've already begun establishing some pretty good relationships with some of the better left-wing sort of militant unions. The United Electrical Workers through Bernie work and also through the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. Very cool union. I actually grew up in a UE household. My father was a machinist in a plant in the Massachusetts and was UE the whole way. So grew up like reading UE news on the kitchen table, and all those left-wing unions. In regards to the other sort of like more conservative unions, I would say this is where Bread and Roses talks about the rank and file strategy. We need rank and file union militants in these sort of establishment unions, conservative unions, turning them around into being fighting organizations again. So again, this fits in pretty well with like what the Communist Party and the Socialist Party were doing in the 30s. That's what we need.
All right. In a moment, I'm going to ask all of the panelists if they could name perhaps some of the points that they would want on their manifesto or party platform, but I'd like to give everyone just a chance to focus on that. So before then, if we could, beginning with Kirsten, if we could talk about the steps DSA should be taking now. And I apologize, I realize I've cut Kirsten and Olivia off from responding to that question about the unions now. So if you'd like, what steps should DSA be taking now to lay the foundations for a new party? And specifically, if you don't mind, how should they relate to unions while they're doing that?
Yeah, so what I would say, regards to the second question, because that's what I was thinking about first, the unions question. I would agree with Rick in that in regards to conservative unions, we do need to do that rank and file strategy to make sure that we have militants in there. But that also we need to have so much of the US workforce is non-unionized, as both Olivia and Rick have said. So from my perspective, I think something we really need to encourage is for workers to build up independent unions in their workplace. Definitely focused on militant socialist values, not merely trying to do like, we need good pay, we need benefits, but also like to have that knowledge of the socialist struggle between the wage workers and the bosses, the CEOs, we need to make sure that there is that fighting spirit that is in unions that have been kind of lost in a lot of these more conservative unions that have lost their radical edge. And if you don't mind, could you actually repeat that second question?
Yeah. What steps should DSA be taking now, both nationally and locally, to try and lay the foundations for this new party and for these changes within the working class and unions?
All right, excellent. So what I would say the first steps that the DSA needs to take, this is going to go back to what I talked about developing participatory municipalist platforms. We need to start by building up relationships with these working class communities that let them know that this isn't like previous political parties where we're just interested in promoting a solution. You're going to vote for this candidate and that's going to be that. We need to develop relationships that are based in mutual aid and that is also based in like truly like involving them in the political process, involving them in, for instance, in Fearless Cities, there was a chapter about Valparaiso, Chile, and how they were able to get socialist municipalist candidates in their city. And what they did was they had this elaborate, involved system where the working class community, they had grassroots organizers come together. They identified the the pressing key issues. And then from there, they then determined their own candidates. And I think doing things kind of in this similar fashion will engender a sense of participation that makes it more likely to actually involve the populace. And I think that is a foundational step that we need to take if we're serious about building a socialist party that is going to be competitive and competent in the electoral sphere.
Olivia, the same question now for you. First, how do you think this hypothetical party should relate to unions? And second, what steps do you think DSA should be taking right now to try and develop towards this party?
Yeah, I think just on the union question, reiterating the points that have already been made, I think both organizing and fostering independent union organizing and also taking over established unions, focusing on outreach to rank and file union members, similar to what we do now in DSA. I think UE is a great model, the only major union in the US to endorse BDS, by the way. And actually the first major union to endorse BDS was the IWW, in case you didn't know. In terms of what steps DSA should take right now to build towards this party, like I outlined, I think that it needs to start at a state level, and we need to have this model replicated in many different states across the country before we can even talk about there being a national party. I think it's a long-term project for sure, but I think it's more realistic and helps us build power more than waiting for a chance to someday maybe break off from the Democratic Party. I think, we always say, someday we want a party. Of course, that's our goal someday. I think if we want a party someday, we have to lay the groundwork for that now. We are out of time. If you're waiting for a sign, these multiple crises stacked up on top of each other, this is it. We need to start doing the work now to make this possible in the future. And I think building it at a state level is the way to do that.
And Rick, if you could just briefly expound upon what do you think the DSA should be doing right now to try and organize towards the formation of a political party or a dirty break?
Right. Obviously, some of it would be continuing to pursue our class struggle election sort of strategy and the rank and file strategy as well. But in addition, I think Jared Abbott and Dustin Gastilla wrote this article. I don't agree with all parts of it, but it was about the kind of surrogate party model. And they actually laid out some concrete things that we could do to begin to lay the groundwork for being a party type organization without actually having a ballot line until we're, because the way they put it and the way Seth Ackerman puts it, we're kind of in an asymmetrical kind of warfare situation now. And we're really in a kind of electorally, we're kind of in what you could call a guerrilla campaign. So some of the groundwork we could start doing though is like a think tank, which would be like a policy making sort of like a group that comes up with kind of socialist legislation, which is a hard thing to do. I know we went through a lot to come up with exactly calibrating the legislation for Up Now campaign. So you can imagine how hard it is to come up with other legislation, a media arm, platform, discipline. So like I said, a very kind of compelling platform that, is democratically decided upon, being member funded and training and political education, a recruitment strategy and coalition building. All of this should be part of the process of working our way toward being worthy of being a political party.
All right. I hope everyone has had an adequate amount of time to think about this question now. Starting with Kirsten, what policies do you think might appear on a manifesto for a party, or in the case of the LFC position, might appear as the sort of priorities for municipal collaboration projects?
All right, yeah, so that is a big question. But what I would say in regards to building up a municipalist platform and what might appear, what I would say is that the stuff that would appear would probably be stuff along the lines of equitable urban planning, the strengthening of tenant protections, I would say probably yes, definitely a municipalist retrofitting of our infrastructure, like particularly our public transportation and all of that, retrofitting that to be green and renewable would definitely be in there, because I know pollution is definitely something that affects many low-income communities, particularly in Lents. I would also say that part of the retrofitting of structure would also involve collaborating or contracting with unions, trade unions, to make sure that they are getting work. Additionally, I think some other opportunities for municipal platforms. I know in Berkeley, the city council set aside, I think it was a few years back, $500K for the establishment of worker cooperatives. That is absolutely something that we can agitate for and use in a socialist way to advocate for more like direct worker ownership projects. And then additionally, obviously, police unions. Part of the municipal platform that I want to get out there is defunding the police, as well as establishing community support systems that can mitigate harms that are caused. And for instance, I would say establishing harm reduction drug policy, establishing public housing, particularly with regards to housing our houseless population. These are all things that, and then I saw in the chat, campaigning against the expansion of I-5, absolutely. And I would also add to that, being against building additional parking structures downtown. There's a whole wealth, and I'm sure that I've not gotten to all of the things that could be on this municipal platform, but those are the ones that have come to my mind.
Olivia, same question to you, and if you would be willing, specifically highlight what sort of tactics and strategies would be used to build a party at a state level, if you did attempt to do that first, and how that would scale up to a national level.
Wait, is this the question about like the manifesto?
Yes, so this would be what would appear on your manifesto, how would that be implemented first at a state level and going forward at a national level?
Yeah, I mean, so this is a socialist party, so of course we would have an explicitly anti-capitalist platform, but it does need to be a platform that's decided by the members. So working off where DSA is now, you know, we're a big tent organization. And the important thing is that any platform for whatever level of election is determined by the party members, not just the individual candidate in terms of electoral politics. And that's how we keep candidates accountable, which differs from running candidates on the Democratic Party ballot line. You know, we as members decide the platform and find candidates to run on it, not find candidates and let them choose the platform. You know, right now we can say we do that, but once DSA candidates get in office, and even during their campaign, they are in no way actually accountable to DSA. They just do whatever they want. And once they're in office, they would have won without our ballot line. If we run candidates on our ballot line and with our platform and with our fundraising that we control, when they want to run for re-election on our ballot line, they need to do what the party and the membership wants them to do. And that's something we can hold over them. We won't nominate them on our ballot line. And I realize that might sound cynical, but that is the reality of the situation that we're in right now. Democrats have that power over them right now, more so than DSA does. And we need to pick a platform. The membership picks the platform for a race, and yeah, the party needs to be in control of the candidate's finances, not the individual candidate. So we have all the data, all the money, and all the power behind the campaign. And that means that membership is what guides campaigns, not individual candidates. And I think in terms of like building that out at a state level, I don't know that I have anything to add on that I haven't already said. Obviously, there's a ton of work and research that would need to be done to actually implement this, but I do think it's totally doable right now in a local race.
And lastly, Rick, the same question, what would the manifesto look like? And if you wouldn't mind, could you specifically highlight the policies you imagine the organization or DSA undergoing while they are participating within the Democratic Party in order to inspire the break you've talked about?
Yeah, so what would be in the manifesto? It would start, a specter is haunting the United States. No, I'm just kidding. It would, it's hard to say because the, things are so rapidly changing right now. Things are so fluid. Like what you would have put on your plan kind of platform, say 6 months ago, would be a lot different from what you would put today. But certainly at the top of the platform right now, I think, of course, universal health care, Green New Deal, all these sorts of, big programs, full employment, a union, definitely making it easier to join a union, things like that. But more than like getting into like a laundry list of all the items that would be on that manifesto or platform, I would talk a little bit about what would inform the decisions, the strategies to sort of how you would come up with these items that would be on the platform, these issues. And I know like Megan Day has written, and there was an author who wrote about like non-reformist reforms or transformational reforms. That is like reforms that are very deliberately calibrated to take some of the load off of working class people and free up their lives, to relieve the stress of like worrying about healthcare or being unemployed or college education or, a myriad of issues. And at the same time, these issues are, these items are written in a way that they curtail the power of capital. They're put heavily tax the rich. We're going to get rid of the medical, the healthcare insurance industry in one fell swoop when we either get Medicare for all or hopefully get a British style national health service. So that's the way I would inform sort of the coming up with the particular items that would be on a manifesto or platform. As far as how the dirty break sort of, sorry, restate that part of the question, the second segment.
What policies would you advocate for while we are in the Democratic Party in order to inspire the dirty break?
Right, that's good because, very deliberately you would, part of that calibration process of how you would come up with the legislation, it should be very targeted to being antagonistic to, especially to the Democratic Party establishment, so that they very much see that, you're building up the popularity of these proposals. At the same time, the Democratic Party establishment is going to be at odds in fighting with DSA or socialist surrogate sort of socialist candidates running on the Democratic Party ballot line. They're going to be fighting tooth and nail and heightening those contradictions within the Democratic Party.
All right. This next question will go to Olivia first. One of the audience members was wondering how would the potential party relate to sovereign native nations? And I'd like to expand that as well. How would it relate to American neo-colonies and American colonial possessions that may seek sovereignty or independence. So how do you envision the party relating to those situations?
Yeah, I think that's an important question. 100% land back should be our position, but also we can't make those decisions without Indigenous voices and without the voices of people whose land has been stolen from them. You know, I think we think about this a lot in the abstract. You know, oh, it was hundreds of years ago, and something that's really helped me connect with the Indigenous struggle in the United States and think about it in a less abstract way is engaging with the Palestinian struggle, who are also struggling against settler colonialism in a much more, you know, recent way, and realizing that it doesn't matter if it was 200 years ago or 70 years ago. Their land was stolen from them, and they should be the ones making the decisions on how they want their land back. And I think that absolutely has to be an important part of our platform, but I'm not going to be like prescriptive about it right now.
If I could just follow up briefly asking for a clarification. So you say that these voices should be involved. Would that specifically mean certain decisions about policies relating to land back or Indigenous organization within the party would be made with collaboration or through cooperation with tribes or sovereign Native nations?
I'm sorry, I think I lost audio for you at the last part of that question.
Oh, sorry. I was just wondering, would these decisions as part of the party platform be made through cooperation or with the advice of sovereign Native nations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's not something that I can decide right now. I think that would have to be an ongoing conversation and a decision that ultimately we wouldn't make. It's how would they want us to engage with that demand, I think is how we would have to approach it.
The same question to Kirsten now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely want to second absolutely everything Olivia just said. Land back 100%. And something that I want to touch upon, because again, a big part of my the LSC strategy, it's not my strategy, but the LSC strategy is developing relationships with various communities, which absolutely includes the Indigenous nations that are very, very represented here in Portland, by creating these durable non-state institutions and by building relationships through that. I do work with another organization that has been begun building up a relationship with the Yakima peoples. And they did that through mutual aid. And now, like, we are in conversation with them. We are collaborating. So I think it's very important to show up in solidarity with these people and to listen, to take directive from them. And absolutely, yeah. And I guess that's going to be that.
Rick, the same question for you. And I'd like, if you wouldn't mind, if you could specifically highlight, given the history of the Democratic Party and its relation to sovereign Native nations, what steps would be taken while the Dirty Break project was underway and then after the break had occurred with regards to relation to sovereign Native nations?
I guess I would say, you know, while you're still working sometimes within using the Democratic Party ballot line, you should be, you know, an advocate and like Kirsten said, listening to these communities. I think, again, like Olivia said, it's hard to be, it's easy to get too overly prescriptive in this, but I would certainly look at, I'm not an expert, we could ask Chris Lowe probably about this, but the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, you know, the process in South Africa with the end of apartheid, you know, I think something on that level is, you know, if a Socialist Party or Workers' Party ever came to, you know, power, that's like top of the list is to do the best to right some of the wrongs that were done hundreds of years ago and right up until the present. So that's all I can come up with off the top of my head is a Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
All right. For our next question, one of the big advantages of forming a new party would be that we would no longer have the baggage of the Democratic Party, and we would be able to reach out to people who might otherwise be repelled by the association with the Democratic Party. So one of our audience members asked specifically, how would this new leftist or working class party be able to appeal to voters who, this is the audience member's words, conservative working class voters that traditionally vote Republican? I'll ask Olivia first. How would this party appeal, or would it appeal to voters who have typically voted Republican?
Yeah, and I think I addressed this a little bit in that, about half of Republican voters support socialist policies like Medicare for all. I heard a story from a DSA chapter in rural Connecticut who was going door to door canvassing for Medicare for all. And if they said they were, with the Democratic Party or in any way associated with the Democrats, they got doors slammed in their faces. But if they just said they're canvassing for Medicare for all, people are like, oh yeah, hell yeah, we support that. And so I think, the Democrat brand is so tainted that even if they're advocating for progressive policies, people don't want to touch it. And so that is something that we have to our advantage. If we're just canvassing as socialists, registering people for the party as a socialist party, that's another reason why I advocate for not calling it the Democratic Socialist Party, because I think that's confusing. It makes people think we're associated with the Democrats in some way, and we're not, and we shouldn't pretend to be. I think that there is a lot of broad support for the policies that we will advocate, as long as we completely break any association with the Democratic Party.
Rick, if you would be willing, how would the party win over people who vote Republican right now?
Yeah, what came to mind for me with that was, remember when Bernie was doing the town halls in West Virginia with a coal mine in the coal mine country, like areas of West Virginia that had overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump, and he sat and he talked about issues that affected their lives. Looked right at people. It's like, what's your healthcare situation like? You, what's your healthcare like? I don't have any health insurance right now. Well, what do you think? Just having a conversation with people about issues that affect their lives, and proposing democratic socialist, sort of like social democratic solutions, I thought he was making a lot of headway with things like that. He seemed to be getting, and there was also that, if you remember that town hall that Fox kind of put forward, and somebody asked the question to the audience, who here would be in favor of, switching to Medicare for all and losing your employer healthcare, and like every hand went up in the audience of a Fox News sort of, so, and Bernie was at that. I think it's just making the case for the, and like Olivia said, like trying to disassociate those policies from the Democratic Party establishment, running separate from that.
And Kirsten, same question.
Yeah, so I definitely want to second what people are saying in regards to the Democrat Party being toxic. I think that is absolutely 100% true. And I think when we ascribe these sort of labels, it kind of shuts people's mind off, a bit. Additionally, and to even quote from the Bible, I think the phrase, "they will know us by our deeds," is paramount. I am reminded of a anecdote I heard from someone involved in the Socialist Rifle Association in regards to doing autonomous disaster relief with Hurricane Sandy, and how they brought all of these supplies to people that desperately needed them, and they wanted to know who they were with. If they were with FEMA, like the Red Cross, and they said, no, we're communists. And here is this, we are here to take care of each other. And these people that are not political knew them by their deeds and just said, oh, well, thanks, communists, thanks for this. So for me, what it is not only distancing ourselves from the Democrat Party, but also by kind of making this less some sort of abstract theoretical conversation about what should be, and directly organizing ourselves to meet the needs of, you know, these low income working class conservatives. I think it's fair to say that we are not going to get the conservative business owners. We will never be aligned in those values. That's just not something that's feasible. What is feasible is the working class conservatives. And I think by demonstrating our values through our deeds, by distancing ourselves from the Democrat Party, we can make headway there. So.
All right, this is a question for all of our panelists as well. I'll begin with Olivia. Obviously, a lot of people are concerned about voting third party because the two-party system is in some ways enshrined in law. First past the post voting and the lack of ranked choice voting, the electoral college, all of these things make people terrified of voting for a third party that can't win and spoiling an election. Third parties are constantly polling higher than they actually perform. How do we avoid this problem of people being afraid of spoiling the vote and handing it to someone they don't want to be elected?
I mean, I actually think in some races it would be great to run as a spoiler. Think about, like, if there was an election where we knew we could make an establishment Democrat lose by 10%, we could just run and tell them we'll drop out if they endorse these demands. And if they don't, that's their choice. But to have that kind of power over them and run as a spoiler, I think is a threat we should be willing to make. I think we're running out of time to continue to choose the lesser evil. And it's time to organize people to vote for something better, to build something better. And I think that people are recognizing that, you know, even if Biden wins, there's not going to be a new normal. We're not going to go back to normal. There's no coming back from what is happening right now. And I think that, you know, we can also, especially in Oregon, we can run in municipal nonpartisan races. We can run in uncontested races or nearly uncontested races. Like, you see all of these races at state level where the Democrats are running unchallenged. We can be a second party because the Republicans are not running against them. We can position ourselves as the second party in those races. And I think, you know, the spoiler thing is not something I would lead with, but it is something fun as a treat. We can do a little spoiling as a treat, but mostly I think it would be focusing on, you know, these nonpartisan races and positioning ourselves as the second party to the Democrats at a state level.
I'd like to remind all of our audience to make sure that their comments in the comment section are constructive and not just short reactions to something that is being said by one of the panelists. That said, Kirsten, same question. How do we allay the fears of people who are concerned about splitting the vote?
Well, I think for the strategy outlined, that I specifically outlined, that is not so much of a worry, because I specifically advocated for the running for either municipal elections or for running county ballot measures, neither of which are partisan. So there isn't really a spoiler to necessarily be had. That said, I do agree with what Olivia said regarding races where spoiling might happen. I think the threat of spoilers could be, and I don't know if it'll play out this way, but I think that could be like motivator for Democrats to be better, but also I don't really care if Democrats are better because I'm not really on their team. So yeah, I guess that's what I basically have to say about that.
Rick, the same question to you, and if you don't mind, reference as well how the dirty break strategy might accelerate or prevent some of those concerns from arising.
Yeah, that is the conundrum in American politics, right? Some of you might remember the Ralph Nader run in the year 2000, and a very close race between Al Gore and George W. Bush, although Gore probably won it because they fucked up counting in Florida, but Nader actually took like 5% of the vote, I think, in the year 2000. It was definitely a sizable enough chunk to, for a lot of liberal types, it was a poison pill. It was like they blamed Nader for throwing for being a spoiler. And that was like a narrative that went down for a long time after that, that third parties would result in that type of scenario where you're just going to elect Donald Trump or you're going to elect George W. Bush or somebody awful like that. And I think we have to like recognize that that's for working class people, that's like a legitimate fear. It's like that there is like measurable differences for a lot of marginalized people in who wins, George, Biden or Donald Trump, things like that. We definitely see that there are extreme limitations to Biden, but for a lot of people, it's very real. They don't want to see Trump elected. So anyway, the dirty break strategy does deal with some of that by basically by running in Democratic primaries and running as a political opponent to the Democratic Party establishment, and by explicitly saying that you're running against the Democratic Party establishment. So anyway, I'm getting tired and I'm rambling.
This will be our final question. So obviously, everyone's focus right now is on the national events with mass protests, the coronavirus response. I want to ask each panelist, and we'll start with Olivia, how do you believe DSA's current relationship to the Democrats hinders or helps our ability to respond to these events? And how do you imagine in the future your party formation's organizing would look like in relation to a mass uprising?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing this play out on the ground right now. Ted Wheeler is a Democrat. Kate Brown is a Democrat. These are people who are actively working against us. And I think that, if we're a socialist party, we can say that we're against them. And that's something that messaging gets muddled right now. I think, DSA is already doing some good work in terms of responding to the crisis. We're doing the emergency unemployed workers organizing at the national level in partnership with UE. We're doing the unemployed workers councils here locally. So I think in that regard, we're already well positioned to organize the unorganized around these crises. We're out on the streets every night supporting the uprisings. It would just be a matter of like having more power and more institutional support if we were a party organization and could more clearly differentiate ourselves from the Democrats. What was the other part of the question? Or was that the whole question?
The final question is just as a final statement, what does your world look like? What does the relationship to organizing look like? What does the mass movement look like in your ideal world with the party established?
You know, I think one of the things about being on the left is that we can be like so outwardly cynical and pessimistic, but I think underneath that, we are all unrelenting optimists, because you have to be. You cannot engage in such a massive uphill climb and just lose all the fucking time and, you know, only survive on the smallest victories to keep you going. And the fact that we are still here, still thinking and creating and debating and working diligently to build a better world means that we are running on hope and a belief that a better world is possible. I think it is possible, and I think we need to start thinking practically about how to lay the groundwork right now to build it.
The same question now to Kirsten. How do you imagine the party's relation to mass movements, and what does organizing and mass protest look like in the future with the party organized?
Yeah, so for my strategy, and again, going back to what Olivia said, if we look at the mass uprisings right now, we would be in a much better position if we could clearly delineate that we are separate from people like Ted Wheeler and Kate Brown, that we have a different party platform, we have different goals, we have different visions of society. Please join us, instead of, hey, we're still running with the Democrats, but we promise we're going to do it differently than Kate Brown and Ted Wheeler. So I think that's an important distinction to make. And in regards to like, what does my strategy or the LSC strategy look like in regards to relating to this mass uprisings that will happen in the future? And this is where I think what I kept talking about, the durable non-state institutions and participatory platforms will come in very handy here. By developing an engaged and involved populace around us that are focused on these socialist movements, we can galvanize that mass working class movement to get out into the streets continuously. We can have an infrastructure for these mass uprisings. For instance, many of like the durable state, non-state institutions I mentioned, community defense patrols was one of them, neighborhood assemblies, like spokes council formations. All of these things can come together to support spontaneous and autonomous uprisings and are flexible and adaptable. And I think by engendering that into the larger Portland community, will do well to facilitate even more participation in the mass uprisings that are sure to come. Climate change is going to happen. It's going to cause a whole mess of socioeconomic problems. Mass unemployment is happening, and it will continue to get worse. I think we're in for more crises, and by building these non-state institutions, I truly believe that we can build communities that can weather them.
And Rick, to close us out, the same question to you.
Okay, I'll keep it brief. I think, you know, going ahead, if DSA, if we continue with this kind of class struggle election kind of approach that we've had with electoral work, but that not being the be all end all, doing the rank and file strategy to expand unions and to make the existing unions more militant. We continue doing political education, just like we are right here, right now, and we keep recruiting and we keep building. I could see us getting to the point where we have tens and tens of, hundreds of thousands of members across the country, right? And that that we have seasoned socialist organizers deeply embedded in the social movements and in unions and militant labor struggles. And that this is the good part. This will get to be, in my view, like a joyful thing to do and not such a grind that it is now where we're losing all the time. When we start to win, it's going to be like the best high ever. It's going to be fun. I'll end it there.
I want to thank so much all of our panelists, everyone who is involved in helping, Portland DSA for setting this up, and all of you for attending. I want to say thank you to everybody who asked questions from the audience and everyone who participated in the wonderful conversation in the chat. A reminder to people in Portland DSA, you can continue this conversation in the Discuss Socialism channel. And I hope that we all continue going forward to work on communication between one another, the project of socialism. I want to extend my personal full solidarity and support to everyone who is going to be out protesting tonight. And I want to remind everyone out there, all of our comrades, everyone tuning in, and everyone who took the opportunity to listen today, we've got a whole world to win. Thank you so much. Good night.